Look at your hand, and yet, deep in a cave in southern Africa, there is a bone more than 40,000 years old, with 29 careful notches cut into its edge. Hold up 3 fingers. You didn't count them. 1, 2, 3. You just knew. 3. Now try the same thing with 17. You can't. Not in an instant. Something in your head just gives up. That built-in sense of number, the one a crow has too, and a lion, and a baby only a few months old, runs out almost immediately, somewhere around 3 or 4. Past that, we should be as lost as any animal on Earth. Someone sat there in the dark and kept an exact count of something. We still argue about what. That tiny row of scratches may be the oldest idea our species ever had. Older than writing, older than the wheel, older than farming, by tens of thousands of years. And it begins with a single trick no other creature has ever managed. Let's start with what you were born with, because it shows you exactly what had to be invented. In 1997, the French cognitive neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene pulled the research together in a book called The Number Sense, and his argument was startling. Evolution handed us, and plenty of other animals, a rough, built-in feel for quantity. Rats can sense it, pigeons can sense it, chimpanzees can pick the larger of 2 piles almost without thinking. A lioness in the dark will listen to the roars of unfamiliar intruders and, in effect, count them against her own side before deciding whether to attack or slip quietly away. Dehaene calls this the approximate number system, and it is old, older than our species, wired in beneath language. In a famous 1992 study in the journal Nature, the psychologist Wynn showed that 5-month-old infants already expect 1 doll plus 1 doll to make 2, and that they act surprised when the numbers don't add up. Babies who can't yet sit up can already sense when the math is wrong, so we do not learn number from scratch. We are born pointing at it. But here's the catch, and it's the whole story. That built-in sense is fuzzy, and it is small. The instant, certain part, the subitizing, only reaches to about 4. The term itself was coined back in 1949 by a group of psychologists led by E.L. Kaufman, from the Latin word for sudden. Past 4, the precision collapses into a vague feeling of more, and a lot, and too many to say. A crow can tell 3 from 4. It cannot tell 29 from 30. And that is the exact wall our ancestors somehow climbed. Because to hold an exact number bigger than a handful, you need a trick that no instinct gives you for free. You need one mark to stand for one thing. You need a tally. And the very first tool for that was probably the hand you are looking at right now. This is why so many of the world's counting systems run in 10s, and why a stubborn few run in 20s. 10 fingers and 10 toes. When the French say 80, they literally say 4 20s. When you count on your fingers without thinking, you are using the oldest calculator on Earth, one that every human is born already holding. But fingers have a problem. Let go, and the number is gone. To keep a count past the moment, to carry it into tomorrow, you had to put it somewhere outside your own body. And that is where the oldest evidence comes in, and it is astonishingly old. Deep in the Lebombo Mountains, on the border of modern South Africa and Eswatini, sits a place called Border Cave. In the 1970s, the archaeologist Peter Beaumont recovered a small piece of bone there, the fibula of a baboon, about the length of your finger. Cut into its edge are 29 clear, deliberate notches. It's called the Lebombo bone, and recent analysis by researchers including Francesco and Lucinda Backwell, using radiocarbon dating, places it at roughly 44 to 43,000 years old. 29 notches. Take a breath and think about what that actually is. Someone, more than 40,000 years ago, needed to keep an exact count, and instead of trusting memory, they externalized it. They put the number into an object. That is the oldest known tally in the world. And some researchers can't help noticing that 29 is almost exactly the number of days in a lunar month, or in a woman's menstrual cycle. Maybe it counted the moon. Maybe it counted a body. We cannot prove either, but the logic is hard to shake. Now the picture gets richer, because this was not a one-off. Travel to Moravia, in the modern Czech Republic, to a site called Dolní Věstonice, a settlement of Ice Age mammoth hunters. In 1937, the archaeologist Karl Absolon uncovered the leg bone of a wolf there, about 18 centimeters long, dated to around 30,000 years ago. It carries 55 notches. And here's the detail that stops you. They are cut in groups of 5, and a longer notch roughly halfway along splits the whole sequence into a run of 25 and a run of 30. That is not just tallying anymore. Grouping your marks, bundling them into 5 so you don't have to recount from 1 every single time, is the seed of structure. It is the ancestor of the idea that would eventually become 5 and 10, and the whole machinery of place value. Just beside the bone, the excavators found the carved ivory head of a small figurine. 30,000 years ago, someone in that camp was counting in chunks and making art in the same cold season. But this is where the story gets genuinely controversial. On the shore of what was once Lake Edward, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a Belgian geologist named Jean de Heinzelin found a small, dark bone in 1950 and later described it in Scientific American. The Ishango bone, likely somewhere between 20 and 25,000 years old, has a sharp shard of quartz still fixed in one end, and it is carved with notches in 3 separate columns. And when you add up the groups, patterns jump out. One column contains 11, 13, 17, and 19, every prime number between 10 and 20. Another is built around 10, plus and minus 1. To some researchers, this is a coincidence hiding in a small set of scratches. To others, it is evidence of real arithmetic, even a faint glimpse of doubling or prime numbers, 20,000 years early. The archaeologist Alexander Marshak argued it recorded the phases of the moon. We honestly cannot settle it, and we should be honest about that. But even the most cautious reading is extraordinary. This is a human being deliberately organizing numbers into columns and groups. And here's a twist you might not expect. The bones are only half the story, because you don't actually need a bone at all. Numbers can live on the body itself. Among the Oksapmin people of Papua New Guinea, studied by the psychologist Jeffrey Sachs, people traditionally count using 27 parts of the body. You start with the thumb of one hand, move across the fingers, up the wrist and forearm to the shoulder, across to the neck, over the ear and the eye and the nose, and back down the other side to the opposite hand. Number 14 is literally your nose. This is a complete, working counting system with no tools whatsoever, the tally worn on the skin, and it tells us something important. Counting isn't a single thing humanity discovered once and handed around. It's a technology that different cultures invented again and again, in different shapes, wherever they happen to need it. And some of those reinventions barely look like counting at all. Fly to the Andes of South America, where the Inca ran an empire of millions of people, with roads and armies and vast storehouses of grain, and did all of it without a single written word. Instead, they kept their records in knots. A quipu was a thick cord of dyed llama or cotton string, with dozens, sometimes hundreds of thinner strings hanging off it, and tied into those strings were knots. The position of a knot along the string gave its place value, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. A full decimal system spun into fiber. The kind of knot told you the digit. The color of the string told you what was being counted. Scholars like Gary Urton at Harvard have spent years learning to read them. A trained Inca accountant, a quipucameoc, could run a warehouse, a census, or a tax record by moving a fistful of knotted string through his fingers. No paper, no numerals, no alphabet. Think about what that proves. The urge to pin a number down, to store it outside your own skull so it survives the night, runs so deep in us that an entire civilization built its accounting on it without ever inventing writing at all. And here is the proof that counting really is an invention, and not a reflex. Some cultures simply never built the larger version of it. Deep in the Amazon, the Pirahan people, documented by the linguist Daniel Everett and tested by the psychologist Peter Gordon, use words only for something close to 1, 2, and many. In a 2004 study in the journal Science, Gordon laid out rows of objects and asked Pirahan adults to match them exactly. Up to 2 or 3, they were fine. Past that, they drifted into estimates and lost the thread. Not because they lack intelligence. None of this is about intelligence. But because exact counting is a tool, and it was a tool their world had never once needed them to forge. Sit with that for a second. The numbers that feel as natural to you as breathing are not automatic at all. They were built and taught and handed to you. So where does all of this lead? It leads eventually to the moment counting quietly rebuilt the world. Around 10,000 years ago, in the ancient Near East, Right as people were learning to farm, they began using small clay shapes, tokens, to keep accounts. The scholar Denis Schmont-Besserat spent decades cataloging thousands of them. A cone meant a small measure of grain, a sphere meant a larger one, an ovoid meant a jar of oil. Each token stood for a specific thing, and you could hold your entire harvest, or your entire debt, in the palm of your hand. People even sealed tokens inside clay envelopes and pressed the shapes onto the outside, so you could read what was inside without breaking them open. And then, around 5,000 years ago, someone realized you didn't need the tokens at all, only the marks. Those impressed signs slowly hardened into the world's first writing, cuneiform. Read that again. Writing did not give birth to counting. Counting gave birth to writing. The very first texts humans ever wrote were not poems, or prayers, or laws. They were receipts. And once numbers lived on clay, they multiplied into everything. Those same Mesopotamian scribes built their arithmetic on the base of 60, and that ancient choice still quietly runs your day. It is why an hour has 60 minutes, why a minute has 60 seconds, why a circle turns through 360 degrees. With numbers written down and stackable, people could finally do what raw counting had always promised. They could track the seasons, predict the rising and flooding of the rivers, chart the slow wheeling of the planets across a year, and tax an entire city. Astronomy, calendars, money, debt, the machinery of the state itself, all of it is built on top of that first small, stubborn act, making one mark stand for one thing. And here's a detail that should genuinely surprise you. That first, crude idea, one notch for one thing, never actually died. It outlived the clay tokens, and cuneiform, and Roman numerals. In medieval England, the royal treasury kept its accounts on wooden tally sticks, notched to record a debt or a tax, then split lengthwise down the middle, so each party held a matching half that could never be secretly altered. The English exchequer used these notched sticks for around 700 years. They were finally abolished in 1826, and in 1834, someone decided to burn the enormous leftover stockpile in the furnaces beneath the House of Lords. The stoves overheated, the flues caught, and the fire spread until the entire Palace of Westminster, the seat of the British government, had burned to the ground. A pile of notched sticks, the direct descendant of a scratched baboon bone, took out Parliament itself. The oldest counting tool humans ever made was still in government service, almost within living memory. So here's the reframe, the thing that flips the whole story. We tend to talk about numbers as something humans discovered, like a law of nature that was sitting out there waiting to be found. But look again at what those bones actually record. It isn't discovery, it's invention. The radical act was never noticing that there were 29 of something. A crow half notices quantity. A baby senses it. The radical act was letting a scratch on a bone stand in for the thing itself, so the number could be carried, and stored, and checked tomorrow by someone who wasn't even there when it was counted. That's not counting. That's the birth of the symbol. And we know the human mind was already reaching for exactly that trick deep in the Stone Age. In Belombo's cave in South Africa, someone scratched a deliberate crosshatch pattern into a piece of red ochre 73,000 years ago, one of the oldest abstract drawings ever found. A tally mark may be the oldest surviving idea on the planet. It is the first time we can prove a human looked at a mark and thought, this stands for that. Let's put it back in order. The number sense itself is millions of years old, shared with animals, sitting quietly in your brain right now. 44,000 years ago, someone at Border Cave cut 29 notches into a baboon's bone. 30,000 years ago, a mammoth hunter in Moravia was already counting in groups of 5. 20,000 years ago, columns of numbers were carved beside an African lake. 10,000 years ago, clay tokens were counting the harvests of the first farmers. 5,000 years ago, those tokens hardened into writing. The Inca would later run an entire empire on knotted string, and England kept its royal accounts on notched wooden sticks until almost 2 centuries ago. And every single one of those steps runs straight down into you. So the next time you glance at a clock, or a price tag, or a phone number, and a few meaningless scratches of ink instantly become a quantity in your mind, with no effort, no thought, nothing at all, remember what that is. It is the same trick a human being worked into a baboon's bone 44,000 years ago, in the dark, by hand, for the very first time. You are not just reading a number, You are using humanity's oldest invention, the mark that stands for a thing. All the research is linked in the description.